All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Ask the Expert, the podcast from the American Offshore Wind Academy, where we sit down with industry leaders to ask one or two burning questions that are top of mind for the sector in a short and focused conversation. My name is Serene Hamschel, and I lead the American Offshore Wind Academy. And today, my guest is Jeremy Merz, the managing director and partner at BCG, Boston Consulting Group. Jeremy has extensive experience working on offshore wind markets in the US and also globally. He also has significant experience in developing large scale projects and portfolio strategies for offshore wind developers here in the United States and worldwide. Hi, Jeremy, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Serene. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Jeremy, let's dive right in. What's going to happen after January 20th? I think everyone is asking this question. Trump said many times that he will end offshore wind on day one. So, what does that mean? What do you think the possible scenarios that we should look at?
Thanks. As you say, very interesting question, and I would say upfront, very hard to answer at this point in time. I mean, we will know more towards end of January, and for now we can speculate. So happy to be here to speculate. And basically, what we see is that there are six major levers of what could be implemented and what the Trump administration could actually do. So quickly going through these. First of all, there's a slowdown in permitting that could happen. That's just regulatory changes. There is a change in financial incentives that Trump administration could push through. There are changes in the amount of lease auctions, limitations of how many lease areas are actually auctioned off, changes in the power that states have, and Republican states could further block projects, for example. There's also changes in PR and political pressure. And last but not least, reprioritization of energy policy. So you see, there's a very long list of things that could happen.
Mhm.
I think because you asked about scenarios, at the minimum, what we would expect is, given the increased uncertainty that we have at the moment, investors, developers will probably shift some of their capital to offshore wind outside of the US or to other energy resources in the US. So
Mhm.
that is an effect I would claim will most likely in any case happen. And then on the other extreme, I think we could see a world where all of these levers, or most of them, are pulled, and on top we have executive order that is also issued by Trump in the very first days. I think that's the other extreme. Most realistically, we would see it somewhere in the middle, and these levers in the end they will lead to a slowdown, but I will make my case in in a
Yeah.
few minutes why I don't believe it will actually lead to death of offshore wind in the US. I think that's a very, very unrealistic scenario, but happy to debate it, and also happy to be debated in the comments.
Sure. And I actually see the slide that you put together, and I'm looking at the lease and auction limitations and the point you mentioned, reallocate areas. What do you mean reallocate areas? Do you think that these areas will be dedicated for oil and gas instead of being used for offshore wind?
Yes, so by reallocate areas, what we mean is that areas that have so far been allocated to offshore wind, that they're basically just taken out of that allocation. Yes, it can be for oil and gas, but it can just be for not for offshore wind anymore. So yes, in parts, but basically that's just a change of the allocation.
Okay. And so in this case, what do you think the industry should do, given and I really appreciate putting all of this detailed information here. This is really insightful. So how do you think the industry would act based on that?
Yes, so happy to actually quickly go on the second view that we have here, because this will help us also determine what the industry should and has to do. So if you look at the US at the US offshore wind project landscape, I mean, of course, we have the projects that are already operational today, the ones that are in very concrete construction. But besides those projects that we don't expect to be touched, we kind of have four categories. On the very far right here, the ones that are most progressed, having an
Mhm.
offtake and a COP already. And these projects, we believe, are very hard to touch. It would require a lot of political energy to significantly halt their development. So there is a low to medium potential impact by the levers that we've showed on the previous slide. Now, if we look at the COP one, yes, there's more impact that could be here. That's 5 gigawatt, but also once the COP is approved, all of the permitting delay levers that we mentioned before, they cannot significantly impact the development anymore. And the projects at risk are really the ones to the left here, the ones who either don't have a COP yet,
Mhm.
or the ones that have basically just the lease area. And I believe that for developers, what they need to do really depends on where they are with their projects. And of course, some of them also have projects in various different buckets, right? But basically, if we're going to the very right, the ones that are being progressed, I think for them, it's important just to stay very close to the state, potentially also to BOEM, to make their case and make sure that they can continue progressing the projects, which we would currently foresee to happen. Whereas the projects that don't have yet the COP secured, there's also, I think, additional work required in terms of PR, right? So offshore wind, Trump brought offshore wind also very much in the public's focus, and I think additional PR engagement by developers will be required to manage their stakeholders and make sure that the progress are accepted within the areas that they're built. And if we look to the very left, if at the lease area secured, but not much more than that, in those cases, we're really talking about developers who might consider reshifting some of their capex and basically expecting a delay by a few years into the future and then only starting to fully develop their US projects a few years down the road. So as said in summary, I think different actions are more relevant for different players depending a bit on where most of their capacity is. But
Mhm.
important that this view shows that the nine, and I would even be optimistic here and count the additional 5 gigawatt as well, that there's a very significant pipeline in the US that most likely will still take off, even despite the messaging that has been around over the last few weeks and months.
So yeah, this is also insightful. Thank you so much for sharing that. What do you think of the wind energy areas that were supposed to be auctioned later this year or planned for next year, namely Oregon and the additional wind energy areas in Gulf of Mexico?
Yeah, that's a very it's a very good question. Look, I think the US has already auctioned quite a good amount of lease areas if you compare it to the OREC auctions and offtake auctions that have been out there, right? So there's a, I wouldn't call it an oversupply yet, but there is clearly much more lease areas available than what we see on the offtake
Mhm.
being auctioned at the same time. And given the increased uncertainty around where offshore wind is going in the future, I would actually see a challenge in attracting enough developers to have very competitive bidders and auctions. And I think there is a reasonable case here for BOEM to also say, let's wait with auctioning significant amounts of additional lease areas in the near future. I do see a case in general to just, even if there is not that much political pressure from a Trump administration, just to postpone some of these auctions into the future.
Yeah, this is definitely a great summary, and I think we already reached our time. And thank you so much, Jeremy, for sharing this insightful informations and putting all the scenarios out there. As you mentioned, there is really nothing certain, and let's wait and see what's going to happen after January 20th.
Perfect. Thanks so
All
much.
right. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for you for also joining our podcast. And hopefully, we'll host more episodes in the future, and also we can discuss post January 20th as well. All right. Thank you, Jeremy.
We'll have to. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.